What's going on, guys? It's Danny Do It All, and today I'm going to be working on my wife's Ford Taurus X. We're going to be changing out the rear brakes here on this car, and I'm going to show you step by step on how to do it. It's a pretty easy procedure, so just follow along. Alright, so we want to make sure that we're safe whenever we're working on cars, so I'm going to go ahead and block off the front wheels with some cinder blocks. Alright, so on the Ford Taurus X, there's a couple spots where you can place the floor jack. One is going to be right here where the pinch weld is, and another couple spots you can place it here or here, and we're going to place it right here. Alright, now with the vehicle safely placed in the air on jack stands, we're going to go ahead and remove this cover out of the way. I just applied the emergency brake or the parking brake to make sure that the wheel doesn't spin. You're going to take a 19mm socket and a breaker bar, and we're going to remove these 5 lug nuts. Alright, now we'll remove the wheel out of the way. I suggest that you try to grab the wheel on the tire and not put your fingers inside here, just in case it falls off. You don't hurt your fingers on the rotor. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do with your parking brake still applied, we're going to go ahead and remove this bolt that's right here. But as you can see, mine is really messed up. We're definitely going to spray some rust penetrant on there, just because it is really rusty. So then I'm going to take a T40 Torx tip, and I'm just going to make sure that I line it up in here the right way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a hammer, and I'm going to go ahead and hammer it in to see if we can get this out. Now that I've hammered it in a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and grab a ratchet, and we're going to try to take it off. Alright, so now with the wheel removed and out of the way, we have access to our rotor and our caliper. We're going to remove 2 13mm bolts that are holding these brake pads onto the caliper, and then we're going to remove the caliper by removing 2 15mm bolts on the back here. So 2 13 and then 2 15, and I'll show you that now. Alright, so grab your 13mm wrench, and we're going to go ahead and remove this bolt and this bolt right here. Put that to the side in a safe location. And just whenever you remove bolts off a caliper or anything, just make sure that they are the same size. If they're 2 different sizes, just make sure that you remember which bolt goes in which side. Alright, so with those 2 bolts removed, we can just simply pry this part of the caliper forward and out. I've grabbed a flathead screwdriver so we can pry this out of the way. If you did apply your parking brake to remove the wheel, make sure that you take it off now so that you can remove this part of the caliper. And we'll just slide that off to the side. Just make sure that you're not placing any pressure on the brake line that goes to the caliper. Alright, so this is a view from behind the caliper, the 2 15mm bolts that we're going to remove next to take off this caliper. So grab a 15mm wrench. And before you completely remove this bolt, go ahead and loosen up this one here. Alright, now with that nut out of the way, you can see there's quite a bit of rust here around the rotor. We're just going to go ahead and spray some penetrant. And then, since my rotor is pretty stuck on there, we're going to take a decent sized hammer, and we're going to whack it here on the edge and kind of spin the rotor and hit it until it breaks free. Alright, so now with that rotor out of the way, we can work on cleaning up this hub and getting this rust off of here, so that when our new rotor meets on this hub surface, it'll be a nice clean surface and it'll sit flush up against the hub. So grab a steel wire brush. I have a couple different sizes here, and just going to clean up the rust that is sitting around this hub here. Alright, now that we removed all the rust off of the hub, we're going to spray it down with some brake clean. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start working on cleaning up this caliper so that we can put our new brake pads on here. Simply pull these off. And then actually I have my new brake pads here. Just make sure that they are the same. Look at them. Make sure you line them up. Make sure they're the same size. And these look exactly the same. Same thing with your hardware. Just make sure that you match it up with your new hardware to make sure that they're the same. And these are exactly the same as well. And then before you remove all your hardware, just take note of the way that it is placed on there, just so that you have an easier time putting it back on. Alright, so you're going to take your steel wire brush again, and we're just going to clean up where our hardware goes so that we have a nice flat surface, so that these brake pads can glide back and forth without binding on any maybe high spots that are rusty. So we're just going to go ahead and clean those up now. So as you're cleaning this caliper, if you're getting a lot of dust, you can saturate it with some brake clean. Just make sure that you're careful that you're not spraying a bunch of brake clean on these rubbers for these guide pins, and careful with damaging them with your steel wire brush. Alright, now with the majority of the rust cleaned out, where our hardware is going to go, we're going to focus on these guide pins. I like to focus on one at a time, just to make sure that I'm not mixing them up. Sometimes they're different sizes. So what you're going to do is you're just going to gently pull on them and pull the rubber back off of it, and then slide them out like that. And you can see this one here has a small rubber that's on it, and we're just going to go ahead and pull that rubber off before we start cleaning this with brake clean so that we don't damage this. And set that off to the side, and then you can pull this rubber off of the pin completely. And then we're going to go ahead and clean this up with some brake clean and some rags and paper towels. Now if your pin has any rust on it, you can take a light grit Scotch pad and you can gently sand away the rust, and make sure that you go lengthwise on the pin and just go around the pin slowly wherever your rust is. And then I also like to make sure that the top of the pin is clean right here, because sometimes you get rust forming here and then you won't get a good seal on the rubber, and then you can get water coming in there. So I like to go ahead and clean up that little bit of rust with a Scotch pad as well. Alright, and that pin is clean. Now with the rubber that was on our pin, you could just use some dish soap and water to clean this out. Now we're going to focus on where our pin goes inside of. What I like to do is I like to spray some brake clean inside of that area. Kind of like to saturate it and swish it around. And dump it out. Then I take a paper towel. Make sure you don't leave any remnants of paper towel inside there. Just make sure you take a good look inside to make sure that's nice and clean. Once the inside of the caliper is clean, I like to make sure that the sealing surface on the outside where the rubber goes is also clean. So again, you could take your brass brush on here or your Scotch pad and just clean out these edges. And just one last time to make sure that nothing is in there, spray some more brake clean in there, swish it around, and then empty it out. Alright, so now with this all cleaned out, our pin cleaned out, the housing which our pin goes in is all cleaned out, and I've also cleaned out our two rubber grommets that we have here. We're going to go ahead and put this back together. We're going to be using a silicone based grease for this, just so that it doesn't damage any of our rubber components that are here. So we're going to place some grease on our pin, slide our rubber back on, and then we're just going to rub this on our pin. Make sure you place your rubber protector on there. Alright, so with the guide pin greased, I'm going to go ahead and insert it. You're going to make sure that you get the rubber seated on there carefully, and you just want to make sure that these move freely, and then just do the same on the other side. Alright, so now that we have our guide pins installed, we're going to go ahead and work on putting our hardware on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some of this ceramic lubricant for brakes on here. It's a synthetic brake lubricant. So I'm just going to place a little bit on here. All the areas where that brake hardware is going to be touching this caliper. Alright, now we're going to take our hardware and we're going to go ahead and install it onto the caliper. So this one, you see these little tabs right here, they're going to hold on to the brake caliper. And you're going to press it on there, just like that. That's one, and now we'll do the same for the other three. And remember, these are specific to which side they go on. Alright, now with the hardware on there, we're going to apply a little bit more grease onto the face of these where the brake pads are going to slide. Alright, so now back at the car, we want to work on cleaning up this part of the caliper. So we're going to clean the face here of the piston, and we're also going to go ahead and clean this side here where the brake pad sits up against. So take your steel wire brush and go ahead and just clean off the face. Make sure you're careful with this rubber around the piston. Make sure that you don't damage it. Also, while you're cleaning this part of the caliper, just make sure that you're careful with your brake line, that you're not pulling on it. On this rubber here, I like to spray a little bit of soap and water on here to kind of clean it up. And I'll take a soft brush and I'll just clean up all that dirt and grime that's on here, so that when we push this piston back in, there's not a bunch of dirt sitting around this rubber that could end up damaging it. Alright, now with this all cleaned up, we're going to put this to the side. We're going to put this caliper back on here temporarily, just so that it's held in place while we're trying to push the piston back in. So you're going to take your bolts, and again, this is just a placeholder so that while we're trying to push this piston back in, the caliper isn't moving around on us. You don't have to bolt these down or anything. We're just hand threading them on here. Alright, so the next step is to grab our piston retractor tool. I definitely recommend that you get one of these if you're going to be doing this job, just because with this piston, we have to turn this piston while we're pushing it back in. And so we're going to be turning this piston clockwise because we're on the driver's side, and if we were doing the passenger side, we would be doing it counterclockwise. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use this tool. Alright, so with our tool, we're going to take a look at these two metal protrusions, and we're going to place them where these notches are. Our thruster plate's up against the back of the caliper. And then what we do is line up those metal protrusions with those notches. Alright, before we start pushing this piston in, what I like to do is I like to bolt the bottom of this caliper to the top pin here, just to help me hold it in place so it's not flopping all around and pulling on the brake lines. So I'm just going to go ahead and place this bolt in, thread it in by hand, just to help me hold it while I pushing this piston. Alright, so before I start turning this piston, I'm going to apply a little bit of oil here where the metal meets the rubber, just to make sure that we don't damage the rubber on there. Alright, also before I push this piston back in, I'm going to take a little hose in my bottle for old brake fluid, and I'm going to place this onto the bleeder here, like that. So to push in this piston, we're going to apply some pressure by turning this bolt counterclockwise. Not a whole lot of pressure, because then it's really hard to turn this piston. And then we're going to turn this piston clockwise. And then again, as we turn this, we want to apply more pressure and turn. Apply more pressure and turn. And we're going to repeat this until the piston goes all the way back in. And apply some pressure to it as well. And you'll see the old brake fluid start to come out of there. And that is all the way pushed back in. Won't go anymore. Now we'll close our bleeder valve. Remove the hose. Now we can remove our tool as well. Alright, now that we pushed our piston all the way back in, we can unbolt it from the top of this caliper here. And we're just going to place that to the side for the moment. Take off this part of your caliper as well. Put that off to the side. Now we're going to take our brand new brake pads, and we want to try to make sure that we don't get any grease on the face of this brake pad. Alright, so the brake pad, we're just going to go ahead and slip it onto these grooves right here. I'm going to go ahead and slide this in like this, and slide these tabs, slide the brake pad into those tabs. That's one. Then we'll do the other side. And that's two. And that's all there is to putting those brake pads on the caliper. Alright, so before we put our new rotor back on there, we're going to go ahead and put some anti-seize on the face of this hub, just to make sure that that new rotor doesn't get stuck to this hub in the future. And we're going to kind of just spread it all around. Alright guys, so we got our new rotor here, and as you can see, this one says rear driver's side. When they ship these rotors out, they actually put a coating of oil on these just to prevent them from getting rusty. So what we're going to do is we're going to want to remove the oil off of the surface of the rotor on the front and on the back. So I'm going to spray some brake clean onto a paper towel and just wipe it down. Alright, now we can go ahead and put our rotor in place. Take some blue medium thread locker, place it on the rotor bolt. Ideally, I'd be putting a new bolt on here. I just don't have one with me, and I don't have enough time to go get one. So I'm going to reuse this one for now and then replace it. Make sure that the rotor is flush up against the hub. Alright, so assembly is just going to be the reverse of what we did to take it apart. So we're going to take our medium blue thread locker again, and we're going to place it on these 15mm bolts for the caliper. Going to take our caliper. It's going to go on there like this. You have the space here for the rotor. So put the rotor there in between the two brake pads. Line up the caliper with the holes in the back and insert your bolts. Second 15mm bolt. Put some more blue thread locker on there. Grab your 15mm wrench so that you can tighten up these bolts. Alright, so now we're going to take this part of our caliper. We're going to place some of this synthetic grease on the piston face and then also on the back here where the brake pad is going to be touching the caliper, just to help prevent us from having any squeaks. And then also on this piston, we want to make sure that these notches are facing up and down, because on this brake pad here, there's a little metal protrusion that's going to be placed inside this notch here. Alright, just like that. And we're going to go ahead and put this caliper in place. Then we're going to take our 13mm bolts with some more blue thread locker. On these pins, make sure that they are facing front to back, because if they're not, they won't seat properly because the caliper has a little notch for them. That notch is to help prevent this pin from spinning while you're trying to tighten down this bolt. Some more thread locker on the bottom bolt. Make sure you don't forget to put your cap back on your bleeder valve. Alright, so now with your caliper back in place, your brake pads in place, I would recommend going back with some brake clean on a clean rag or paper towel and spinning this rotor and just making sure that you have a nice clean surface and the back as well. Alright guys, so the last thing that we have to do is put our tire back in place. And if you guys have enjoyed this video, please let me know. Please hit that like button and subscribe. And please comment down below. I appreciate you guys watching this video. I hope that it helps a lot of people out there. Save some money. And thank you for watching. When you're tightening down these lug nuts, it's important to try to go in a crisscross pattern. First, I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down by hand all the way. And then again, apply your parking brake so that your tire doesn't spin on you. Alright guys, that's all there is to changing out the rear brakes and rotors on a Ford Taurus X. I hope you guys enjoyed watching the video. Please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Thanks.